Hello, and welcome to the first instalment of my PlayStation Plus download reviews. As it's the new year and I've been itching to play more games, I've opted to start a smaller series to run in tandem with my larger game discourses, which focus more on some of the PlayStation content that's being made available to subscribers, and basically just to provide some kind of briefer snippet reviews, as you know, I often play a lot of games that don't necessarily warrant, or I don't have time to kind of give a lengthy discourse to, but you know, I'd still like to discuss regardless. Now, despite the free price tag that lingers over a lot of titles with the PlayStation Plus subscription, I am actually remarkably frugal with what I choose to download, and I don't like unnecessary bloat or content I'm not interested in sort of floating around on my PlayStation for the sake of it. This War of Mine, however, is a game that I took at face value just based off the gameplay screenshots available. You know, I felt initially that it would be a breath of fresh air, and it looked like a neat little platformer to kind of get into. You know, if only to kind of fill the short spaces of time while I'm waiting for other games to update, or you know, something like that. However, once I installed it and started it up, I was thrown into the immediacy of this time-sensitive and demanding strategy game, you know, tasked with helping my three survivors, Pavel, Bruno, and Marco, you know, scavenge our bombed-out shelter for supplies and medicine. I actually restarted the game pretty quickly because, being something of a pedant, I felt I'd messed up during the first cycle of the game, and I found on restarting that I had the same characters, but I was in a different layout. You know, the house I was living in was completely different to the first playthrough, and this is something that I liked, and I found it quite interesting because it adds a certain replayability to the game, and you can't necessarily just restart and learn from your mistakes as I tried to do. You also start off with varying degrees of handicap. For example, Bruno and Marco were both slightly wounded in my game, which meant that sourcing bandages and building beds was an immediate priority, you know, with the scant resources I had, rather than, for example, trying to source weaponry straight away. So, the crux of this game is that it plays out in two key scenarios: the daytime, in which you construct and fortify your base, feed and rest your characters, and the nighttime, in which you go out into the usually quite dangerous surroundings to scavenge for supplies, you know, to use during the day and you know, do the constructing. So in this way, this War of Mine reminds me quite a lot of other bleak and intense strategy games, for example, State of Decay, which is a fantastic post-apocalyptic zombie game, which is split between the strategy of scavenging and fortifying your home, and the action of fighting hordes of zombies, you know, during the daytime and the nighttime, basically whenever you go outside. The core difference between these two games is where State of Decay focuses on this free-roaming action, this War of Mine is contained in a really beautifully crafted, you know, kind of cross-section environments with a rather stripped-back combat system. If you know, looking at this game as a whole, as an entity, if there was a single word I could actually use to describe it, it would be bleak. The various factors, such as your character's mood, their health, their frequency of eating, and the assault from external forces, you know, they're extremely difficult things to juggle successfully, you know, in this time-sensitive environment. You know, often your characters are so injured, the only person you can send out to scavenge is at death's door, but you return, you know, to find your house has been robbed while the others are sleeping. And then, you know, your fatigued character becomes useless for another whole day. You know, I think a lot of this is down to my initial lack of experience with the game. You know, as I've only played through it 3 times so far, and my first cycle only lasted for 11 days, which is, you know, pathetic, really. Um, but after my first, you know, 11-day cycle of the playthrough, you know, Marco was killed while scavenging, Bruno succumbed to his wounds and died, and Pavel ultimately committed suicide because of his guilt at robbing a neighbouring house. So, yeah, it can prove quite an intense and complex game to kind of struggle your way through. You know, the necessity of effectively managing time and resource is crucial to success, combined with the myriad of random factors such as strangers knocking at your door to scavenge or trade, the misfortune of being caught stealing while out at night, and the items that you actually manage to find. it all combines to create an intense and easy to fail campaign. You know, one night wasted, one night with a fruitless search for resources or medicine can leave your characters with festering wounds, and as the situation grows more desperate, you will find yourself becoming far more emboldened and amoral, you know, with this necessity to survive and keep your party alive. So, while it's impossible to say this game creates a sense of being a victim of war, because despite its bleakness, it's obviously very far removed from reality and a source of entertainment, it does muster a sense of desperation at trying to keep your guys alive, more so than any game I think I've actually played before. The inspiration actually is from a real life, war zone. It was taken from the Siege of Sarajevo during the early 90s, and this real world reference makes the gameplay somewhat more harrowing, knowing it is based on a reality, a almost 4 year siege, which is double the length of Stalingrad for people that know, their war and the sieges and the stuff. And basically this was the Bosnian War that saw a lot of genocide and ethnic cleansing happening throughout the city. On top of this tense gameplay and tangible historical reference point, what nails this War of Mine for me, more than anything else, and again, going back to my first point, the reason I downloaded it, is the beautiful monochromatic kind of cross-hatched art direction and the creeping music score. The gloom of the UI design informs the gameplay because, technically you can't always see what lies beyond a given doorway because of this monochrome, and there's always a dense permeating darkness, in all these kind of houses that you try to scavenge through. But it also creates this beautiful, albeit depressing world which your characters exist in. It's quite claustrophobic, and the persistent darkness, punctuated only by the occasional buzz of a light bulb, it just comes together really well. And on top of this as well, there's a kind of mixture of art styles. As I said, there's a lot of cross-hatching going on, but there's also this mix of photographic imagery and collage-like character design that creates an uncanny but weirdly cohesive style. I think due to the black and white consistency across all these kind of visual styles. But it really works, fantastically well. So in all, I would say that if you like a challenge and don't mind a bit of harrowing existential crisis in a war-torn city, then this is a game for you and you should definitely try it out. However, if you're susceptible to bleak narrative and can't handle some really messed up introspective monologues that come out of your characters and the potential suicides off the back of that, this is not something you should be playing. And sometimes, I have a hard time picking it up if I'm in a bad mood because it won't make it better. So ultimately this proved a very addictive and immediate and very replayable title that I'm happy to have chanced across. And yeah, I definitely recommend giving this War of Mine a go, particularly if you're a PlayStation Plus member and this month can download it for free.